joining us. We really appreciate it. This is Mastering Your Literature Review. So we know that you are the director of the Writing Center and you oversee some of the different tutoring centers that we have here on campus. So we thought it would be really important to have you here, especially with you being an author and having experience having published and things like that. So yeah, I did my research on you, Scott. It's not so. I'm excited about that, and I think you'll be a great asset for our students. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, terrific. Well, I'm always happy to talk about this. I think this topic, I think literature reviews are at least part, look at that, of the backbone of what graduate studies are about, um, because literature reviews require you to understand the sort of lay of the land in the status of research in a particular area in your field, and they require you to um, make judgments and comparisons between different uh, threads in the research, and they just they give you that starting point that's so important in graduate studies, especially when you're working on something like a thesis or something like that, or even a long and involved kind of course paper. And the purpose of them is, like I said, is to demonstrate that you understand the sort of status um, of critical and academic scholarly thought in an area, typically so that you can identify um, a gap or a discrepancy or an argument that you want to contribute to. It's a gap that hasn't been studied yet, or hasn't been studied in the right way, or you don't think it's the right way, or uh, some sort of ongoing debate within the scholarship that you want to weigh in on uh, and have your voice heard on it, or do a a scientific study or a survey or something like that to help us understand that debate or that issue uh, in a deeper way, or become closer to the truth. And so I think they're really, really important. I want to share I'm going to open up a PowerPoint that I often use, um, different versions of this um, with students. So let me share. You see that? Thumbs up if y'all see that. Okay, good.
Yes.
So let me start it up here. All right, so literature reviews. This is for graduate studies this spring. So literature review can be kind of a misleading term because it sounds like you're evaluating or giving your viewpoint or opinion, or kind of saying whether the research is good or bad. And that can be a small part of it, but that's not basically what a literature review is. Better views terms are things like overview, or the state of research, or the ongoing conversation. What is happening in a particular field, and you now have read enough where you can summarize it and characterize the conversation on a particular topic or issue or question. Um, so collect articles, read the literature, summarize the state of research, and this is all for the purpose of identifying gaps or seeing relationships between them things, or identifying variances or contradictions or something that still needs to be analyzed and asked and studied, and then to suggest next steps. Um, so the purpose is to demonstrate a thorough understanding of the current scholarly thought on a specific issue or question and identify areas for new research, also known as gaps. So you're going to summarize the relevant publications. You have to, search carefully and try to find all of the relevant publications. Relevance can is sort of a slippery term because relevance doesn't just mean that it's an article or a book on a particular topic. That still might not be a relevant publication because it might be too old or might not be looking at a particular aspect of the topic. Um, so, relevant isn't just as simple as I put the search term in and something came back. It's relevant to your question, to your specific issue, not just relevant to the overall topic. But you paraphrase specific findings, quote when absolutely necessary. Most of the time in grad school, you don't do a lot of quoting. But overall, you're going to try to simulate a conversation between the researchers. And what I hope to spend most of our time doing here is actually looking at different examples rather than just talking about it in generalities like this. But I do want to talk about some uh, techniques and some specific structures here. When you summarize, you often do it like this. Miller 2019. This is an APA. You don't have to use APA, but that's common. Demonstrated a causal link between screen time and decreased ability to concentrate. So that Miller is the signal that somebody else is talking, and then you give an action verb like demonstrated or interviewed or interrogated or analyzed or whatever the right verb is, and then complete that. This is known as the signal phrase way. But there is another way, and this is really important. This is the way I was taught, is to always put things in terms of, somebody said something or somebody thought something or somebody proved something or tested something or whatever. And you're always, uh, identifying who that is in the text. But in grad school, a lot of times you're asked to not do that. It really depends on your class and on the teacher and on the situation. But this way is actually just as common or maybe even more common. Like this, there is evidence for a causal link between screen time and decreased ability to concentrate, Miller 2009. Get that out of the sentence and just put it in the parenthesis so that, identifying who said it. So there's no signal phrase exactly. Evidence suggests there may be a causal link between screen time and decreased ability to concentrate. Miller 2009. So that's the kind of two ways to do it is with the signal phrase way and with the just putting it in parenthesis at the end. And I can't tell you which one is right. I just know those are the two main ways to do it. Paraphrasing, same kind of thing here. It's not you're identifying a particular detailed fact like this. Adams and Watkins 2017 found that 67% of high school students, blah, blah, blah. Okay. That's the signal phrase way. And then something like this. In one study, 67% of high school students were unfamiliar with, and then it's Adams and Watkins in the parenthesis. Or more than 2/3 of high school students in one study were unfamiliar with. Just again, first way is the signal phrase way, and the second way is just stating the information and then in the parenthesis, giving the citation of where it came from. Quoting, same way. Now, here's one thing I want to point out with quoting. Here we have Blake, 2015, called for a program to train secondary math teachers in evidence-based approaches rather than anecdotally supported approaches. Um, so Blake, 2015, as soon as you've introduced another source, you give the parenthesis there with the year, and this is in APA. And then you do give the page number for quotations. So there's kind of a myth. I've heard students say this a lot um, that APA only has the year, it never gives the page numbers. That's not really true. With quotations, you really should be giving the page number. The reason people say that APA doesn't use page numbers is because often you're paraphrasing or summarizing in APA, and there, APA doesn't insist on the page numbers, but with quoting, you really do need to. Okay, so that's the sort of structure, just the formatting. But the big issue is you're getting all the sources together and they're kind of having a conversation. My metaphor is like a dinner party. You've invited all of these sources together, the authors of these sources, and they're going to sit around a table and have a conversation. And you're leading and organizing the conversation, but you're not the main voice in the conversation. The voices in the conversation are other people. You just direct that conversation. So for a literature review, you're going to focus on a specific topic, often identify a specific question, an issue that has been studied by other researchers, or a research question that has been examined, maybe not as fully as you'd like, but it has been examined. Show how these sources relate to one another, that is, synthesize a conversation, or you could trace the relevant scholarship chronologically. Like you could say this idea first appeared in 2000, 3 years later, somebody else came along and changed it or updated it, and you're tracing the thought and the scholarship in a particular area. That your goal is to identify a research question that you can now address in your own original project. We don't always get there in a paper for a course. You may just do the literature review and identify and synthesize the sources, but for something like a thesis, you are almost always going to conduct the literature review for the purpose of trying to identify something somebody hasn't done, and then you do it. A study that could have been done, should have been done, but hasn't been done, or at least hadn't been done in that way. So your goal is to get to a brand new research question, an unanswered question that you could answer through research. And research, would be an original qualitative or quantitative inquiry, some sort of study. Often when students, especially undergrads, talk about doing a research paper, they're not really doing research. They're doing a literature review, they're synthesizing sources, but they're not really conducting their own research. They're doing a literature review. Here's from Purdue OWL. It says most of the things that I've just said, but it breaks a literature review into different parts: an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. But there's nothing, earth-shattering about that. Introductory paragraph that explains what your working topic and thesis is, a forecast of key topics or text that will appear in the review. That's the introduction. Then in the body, you summarize and synthesize, give an overview of the main points of each source, combine them into a coherent whole. What do they have in common? How do they, where do they disagree? Analyze and interpret. Don't just paraphrase other researchers. Add your own interpretations where possible, especially when showing the connections or the overlap or the gaps between two texts. And then the conclusion, summarize your key findings. So what I want to do is start here. This is an actual example. Now, I did this one for a graduate class, so I'll just explain how this works. This is from an actual paper that I did. Um, and this is about a paper I did about grief responses. And I specifically wanted to look at grief responses to the deaths of pets. And was it, uh, were those responses similar? But I needed to start with some sort of uh, starting point of our of a model of grief, of the grief model, the grief phenomenon, the grief experience. And a famous one, not the only, maybe not the very starting point, but a very important point in the study of grief responses was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in 1969. So I started there and said that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross had broken grief into these patterns, these steps in the process. You've probably heard of them: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And that five-stage model gained some currency. A lot of people started following it and applying that model in therapy, and when they were, working with patients and trying to understand how well they were or were not processing grief, that kind of thing. And so then I took it forward. I said, while this five-stage model became part of the theoretical foundation for medical and health professionals who provide therapy and counseling, researchers have cautioned that grief does not always follow this predictable path. And then I give four examples there: Hale in 1985 and Humphrey in 2009. So there's the relationship between there. Yes, they recognize that um, these stages exist, but they're not necessarily a chronological path. And someone doesn't always go from bargaining to depression. In Kubler-Ross's model, she presented it more as a set of sort of pre-programmed stages. She later admitted that they that grief doesn't necessarily follow exactly that model. In response to these kinds of objections, Kubler-Ross clarified that the five-stage model was never intended as a strict chronological model or as a tool for mental health practitioners. So uh, she said this, then they said this, and then she responded back to that. That's a very short kind of chronological conversation. She said, they said, she said. Um, and this is more of a conceptual conversation later on in that paper. I said, after the Kubler-Ross model was published, other theorists developed similar stage-based models of grief. And then if you read all of that, you'll see that there's three or four different stage-based models that kind of mimicked her in a way, but updated it and kind of disagreed or proposed different stages, but they were similar. After after she popularized this idea of stages of grief, other people wanted to step in and say, yes, she's got the right idea. There are stages, but she doesn't have the stages right. So that's a literature review, a portion of the literature that review that focused on just, specific parts of the conversation. So I hope you can see there how uh, there's a conversation going on. She said this, and then they updated. Other people updated. For instance, um, this is a good one to show it. The shock stage. This is about four lines down. The shock stage parallels Kubler-Ross's denial and anger stages. What's the relationships? Shock is kind of a way of saying denial and anger that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross had already said. But then you identify a gap. And I identified a gap. While researchers have shown similarities between the grief responses of those who lose a human loved one and those who lose a pet, no one up to this point has compared the grief responses of cat owners and dog owners. So there was the gap that I had found. Sometimes you have to look for a very small gap. And we've researchers have described the grief process. They've described it, let's assume, very, well. At least there's been an ongoing conversation for 50 years, 60 years, whatever. And then other people have come along and applied that to pets in general. There's not a study out there uh, studying the grief responses specifically of dog owners and pet owners, especially what stages do they go through? What stages do they tend to follow? Which ones do they stay in the longest? That sort of thing. So to answer these kind of these kinds of questions, the present study employs. So that my present study, that's the one that I was going to do. Where I had, several different ways I was going to investigate that through surveys and textual analysis of online grief forums, and look at, what did pet owners say, and what did cat owners say, and what did pet owners say. I'll be finished in just a little bit.
For the assignment. No worries. We have one. I was let me know.
So, no, it's supposed to be there. We're in the writing center. We ran out of pens, so I got to get them. Anyway, I identified that gap. So that kind of is the whole process. Now I just picked a few little parts out of that, rather long paper that I wrote. Here are some examples from actual published work, though. Okay, so actually, before I move on, we don't have many people here right now, but anybody got any questions or responses to anything that I've already gone over? It's probably fairly simple. I would think what I've gone over. I would think probably. I hope I'm not insulting anybody that who's gone beyond this. No questions.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's
Question. Yeah, okay.
I think it's pretty clear. Like Marty
Pretty
said.
clear. Okay. So let's look at a little more specifically at some published examples of how literature reviews are done. I think most of these examples are in the field of education, but I think I got some other examples in here too. College students succumb to digital distraction regularly. Let's say we were studying digital distraction. Upwards of 70 to 90% of college students regularly text on their mobile phones during class. And this was, this statistic was reported in this source, Kornhauser et al. Et al. Means and others, and Perry and LaRue, I guess that's how it's pronounced, in 2018. Students who text during class often send and receive between 15 and 20 text messages during a typical class period. Dietz and Heinrich said that, and Pettijohn and others in 2015. So there's sort of a chorus effect here. We're all agreeing that that digital distractions, are part of the class pretty regularly. Students are pretty regularly distracted. And how are we, studying that? How regularly do they text, and how many text messages they send? Also, laptop users also spend considerable amounts of time off task. For instance, although only 10% of the current undergraduates surveyed by Witherby and Tauber 2019, and notice how that gotta go backwards. How that year comes right after the source is mentioned. The self-reported frequently using their laptops for off-task purposes. About 26% reported getting distracted by their computers, at least occasionally during class. So you can see the title of this article is The Impact of Digital Distraction on Lecture Note Taking. So all of these people studying it in various ways agree it's a big distraction. So that's kind of creating a chorus. This one agrees, this one agrees, this one agrees. We get that much triangulation, looking at it from different perspectives and different ways of testing it. And we feel like we have a pretty solid claim that digital devices are pretty distracting in class. Here's another one. You can connect multiple threads in the same conversation. Poverty has also been found to be a consistent predictor of school discipline. In other words, how often students are referred for in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, things like that. With low socioeconomic status, students receiving suspension and expulsion at a higher rate. And Brantlinger, Nichols, Petrus et al., Skiba et al., and Wu et al. All agreed on that. So we're connecting those threads in the conversation. They all felt that way. A wide range of demographic variables, including absence of father or mother and quality of home resources, has also been found to be predictors of the likelihood of suspension. Hinojosa, 2008, even controlling for levels of student aggression, Petrus et al. Discovered that students who live in poverty were still more likely to be removed from school. And those are different threads in the conversation. We have suspension and expulsion. We have socio-demographic variables. We have the absence of a mother or father. We have student aggression. All of those things are connected somehow here, and we're showing that basically it turns out to be that all of these indications of poverty and conditions of poverty and sort of a difficult home life can definitely impact how likely you are to face discipline in school. Finally, research has been highly consistent in documenting disproportionate rates of out-of-school suspension and expulsion for African American students. Lots of people have said that African American students are overrepresented in a range of school disciplinary outcomes. So poverty has something to do with disproportionate rates of disciplinary actions, and also race does. So those are, again, two very different threads, but they have something to do with each other, right? That the disciplinary measures in school are not objective, that there's a subjective nature to it. That if you come from a poverty environment, or if you happen to be African American, you're just more likely to be targeted. So it's all about the fairness. But you can connect those together by having lots of data from different sources. And as you can see, this was a published study in a good research journal, American Education Research Journal. And then you identify a gap as these technologies become more intertwined. This is back to the distraction issue. With commercial platforms and composing tools, educators will play a vital role in supporting students in navigating new and changing composing landscapes. Yet current conversations about AI in schools may not include the complexity of young people's writing practices and the ethical and aesthetic concerns about writing and humanity that they grapple with. So you can see there that it's identified a gap. Current conversations in literature have not addressed X. Or here's another one, in identifying a gap. We are seeing an emerging body of literature that looks at how teachers are navigating book banning policies in red states. This literature has been written by both scholars and practicing teachers, and you have your citations in there. In the same vein of research, Barker et al. Argued that teacher educators have an important role to play in preparing teachers to advocate for texts and against book bans. Okay, we haven't identified the gap yet, but check out this next sentence. These studies narrate the real ways teachers are resisting these draconian policies in their classrooms and school. Our study seeks to understand how teachers in a state without such legislation are impacted by this broader moment of book banning. So a lot of studies out there have looked at how teachers in red states where, book banning might be a little more common, are navigating it. But this study says even teachers in states that don't have a history of that or a tendency for book banning, they are adjusting, and it's affecting their practices too. So our study is going to look at that. So that's basically what the business of a literature review is about. It's putting studies together to show that you understand what's going on in the field, trying to find something that they haven't studied, and identifying that so that you have somewhere to go with your own research, even if it's just a small difference, like I found. Like, let's look at cats versus dogs, and I enjoyed doing that study. I don't know that it was a landmark study, but it was fun to do. And I think I did uncover some things. So
Thank you
that's
so much, Scott. I
yeah.
really appreciate it.
So well, I'm happy to take any questions. I realize we only
I have
have one student here, but Ty, maybe you have some questions too, whatever.
so where there's two in the chat. We're going to start with those.
I didn't see the chat. Let me
It's okay. I can read it to you.
okay.
Marguerite asked, how does one know when to stop finding literature? So basically, how do you know when you have enough? And the next question is, well, you can answer that, but the next one is going to be, do you recommend doing an annotated bibliography before a literature review?
Oh, and I see them I'm back to the main screen now, so I see them. Um, yes, the first question, how do you know when you've got enough? That is really difficult. But there is a concept in research. Um, it's called data saturation. It's no clear exact point when you've reached it. I can't give you a number. I can't say once you've found 4 studies or 5 studies or 3 people who agree or whatever. But when you feel um, that when you've reached that point where no matter how many more studies you look at, um, you've they're probably going to keep repeating the same arguments, the same general arguments. You might be ready to stop because you've you feel like nobody's going to surprise me anymore. You run into this too when you're doing interviews and conducting surveys. When you keep seeing the same things over and over, and you start to feel pretty confident that I've got the threads here. I know where the major points of view are on this and what the major arguments are. Then you can stop doing interviews. There's no guarantee that you didn't miss something though. And it depends on what you're doing. If you're doing a doctoral dissertation, the point that you stop is when there aren't, I mean, that technically should be when there just aren't anymore. You really have found them all. You're doing a doctoral level study, and you should, at least in theory, be finding everything that's of any that's of consequence. Everything that's been published in a peer-reviewed journal, everything that's been published in a book that has by an important press. You're never going to find absolutely everything, but at the doctoral level, usually your goal, at least, even if you never get there, is to get them all. At lower levels than that, especially on really big topics where there may be hundreds of different articles on something, usually you're not going to insist on getting just absolutely everything. But there are, doctoral dissertations with literature reviews and reference lists that string out to dozens and hundreds of sources. So I can't, it really depends a lot on the situation. I wish I could give a better answer, but it's when you have enough data saturation to satisfy the moment that you're in. In a Probably in a master's. Marguerite, are you getting at the PhD level or a master's level?
Yes, PhD.
Yeah. In education or what?
Yes, higher ed.
Higher ed. Yeah. I would say your committee is probably going to say, we'd like you to get absolutely everything, knowing that there's almost no way to do that, but that would be the goal. What do you have a topic?
Yeah, yes. I'm interested in looking at how emerging researchers approach and understand the concept of reflexivity and how you know tenets or practices of mindfulness and yoga can help someone understand that reflexivity and use it. Like there's so many connections between like yoga and mindfulness and phenomenology that I'm finding that wouldn't it be really interesting if we kind of learn some of those practices of sort of letting go, not expecting certain outcomes, being willing to basically to listen and knowing your own stuff, your like the position you come from could help noticing what's going on in your body, all kinds of things like that that can maybe help us build our reflexive skills as researchers.
Wow, uh, I love that idea. I mean, that's really interdisciplinary between like a kinesiology almost, and the mind-body connection, and then also educational research. I like it.
Yeah, thank you.
So I doubt that I doubt that there have been just hundreds of studies on that specifically. You probably uh, uh, would not have a, a list that would run, 100 or 200 sources long anyway. So I think that your committee might say, yes, we want every article that's ever been done on something like that. Have you found some stuff specifically putting those together, or do you have to sort of look at both of those and then you put them together?
It's a little of both. You'd be surprised at how many studies there are that they don't look as much as there's some that look at reflexivity and mindfulness. There's really nothing I've found yet that's looking at graduate students and they're like emerging researchers and putting those concepts together. There's lots of there's research out there about mindfulness and even yoga practices with as higher education employees like staff or faculty maybe employ those techniques for themselves for their own well-being or in a classroom setting. So there's some in there that's adjacent, but not exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, my bet, now I haven't done this area, but my bet is you'd find quite a bit on yoga, uh, yoga and that kind of practice as a self-care uh, kind of practice, but not so much as applying it in the classroom or research setting. Is that what you found?
Um, yes, although you'd be surprised. There's more and more research now, like about using, mindfulness practices in college classrooms, in university
Hmm.
classroom settings, which I'm interested in actually pursuing here, like later, like after, as part of the work that I do here. So yeah,
Wow.
it's very interesting, and there is just a lot out there just about yoga and mindfulness in general as techniques and practices that people are employing. So I've got to sort through all of that and looking into contemplative phenomenology as an avenue to use my
Mhm.
methodology.
So, that's fascinating. So, I don't know if I answered your first question, but it really kind of depends. I mean, at the are you at the dissertation stage now?
No, not yet. I'm in my third year, finishing up my
I,
third year, so getting
I got
close.
you. Okay.
No, thank
Uh,
you.
I'm assuming uh, some of the courses. I'd be shocked if some of the courses that you've already taken uh, didn't require you to do lit reviews and identify gaps and that kind of thing.
We have, yes, we've done a couple of lit reviews in
Yeah.
our
Okay.
program so far. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a negotiation. So the next one, do you recommend doing an annotated bibliography before a lit review? It can be a good practice uh, to do that. I wouldn't say that I always recommend it because um, you can sometimes sort of jump right into it because you read them, you know where they and you've taken notes. You haven't necessarily produced uh, a formal annotated bib. But I would say this, you got to read the sources first. I've worked with so many students where it was clear they really didn't, they maybe found sources, but they hadn't really fully uh, read them or understood them, and they were trying to jump into and they were skipping that whole reading carefully stage. That's the stage I'd say I can't overlook. But if it's done for a class, absolutely you need the annotated bibliography. Those are often done a lot more uh, for um, we're going to share these sources and produce a uh, a shared list of resources, and then you're able to pick from them rather than just as raw prep for a lit review. But they can be, and certainly we teach students to do that so that they don't skip that process. Um, at myself, I'll admit I've gone straight to just reading my sources and writing the lit review without that intermediate step. Well, I feel like all of this was fairly fundamental rather than and it wasn't really breaking any new ground or it shouldn't shock anybody. But I hope just reviewing it was could be kind of helpful for students.
I think it'd be really good for some of our new graduate students, especially like first gen graduate students who didn't conduct any research for undergrad and things like that. So I really appreciate it. I think this would be extremely beneficial towards them. And even for the people who haven't published or who haven't conducted research in a long time, like it's always good as a good, like you said, a refresher. So I think that'd be good for sure. So thank you
Well,
so much, Scott. I really appreciate it.
sure. Thanks for inviting me.
All right, well, that concludes this workshop, and I hope everybody has a good day.